The sound of laughter echoed through the sleek marble hall of the country's most exclusive private club. It was a gathering of power, wealth, and inflated egos, where billion-dollar deals were sealed with a sip of whiskey and a smirk. At the center of it all was Damon Ellis. Damon was the kind of man who had everything: money, charm, ruthless ambition, and an ego to match. His name echoed across boardrooms, and his dating life was tabloid gold. He was the definition of a high-society bachelor: handsome, sharp-suited, and hopelessly shallow when it came to love. But that night, after a couple of scotches and a little too much bravado, Damon's best friend and longtime rival, Mason Carrington, decided it was time to challenge the king of Wall Street. "I bet you couldn't last 6 months married to a real woman, one who doesn't fit your perfect little fantasy." Mason smirked, tilting his glass. No models, no influencers, no cosmetic-enhanced smiles, just a regular woman. Damon raised an eyebrow. "You're joking, right? You think I can't handle a woman who isn't a carbon copy of my type?" "No," Mason replied coolly. "I think you'd fold the minute things got real." There was a pause. Then Damon leaned forward, a cocky grin spreading across his face. "Fine, name her." "I already have," Mason said, flipping his phone screen toward Damon. There on the screen was a photo of a woman with a quiet fire in her eyes and a confidence that needed no validation: Sienna Rhodes. Sienna wasn't what the tabloids would call a beauty queen. She was curvy, wore minimal makeup, and worked as a creative director for a small, independent publishing house. She wasn't the kind of woman who followed trends. She created her own. And she had absolutely no interest in shallow men like Damon Ellis. "That's your pick?" Damon scoffed, squinting at the screen. "She looks like she'd eat me alive." "Exactly," Mason grinned. "She's strong, independent, smart as hell. You wouldn't last a month." Damon's jaw tightened. His pride couldn't take the hit. "Let's raise the stakes," Damon said. "I'll marry her, and I'll stay married for 6 months. No cheating, no walking away. If I do it, you owe me $1 million. If I fail, I'll donate $1 million to your charity of choice." Mason laughed. "Deal. But you better believe, this woman is no fool." 2 weeks later, Sienna Rhodes sat at a corner table of a quiet downtown cafe, casually sipping her latte and flipping through her tablet when a tall, sharply dressed man slid into the seat across from her. Damon Ellis. She glanced up briefly, then back at her tablet. "You're late." Damon blinked, caught off guard. "You were expecting me?" "I figured it was only a matter of time before the Lion sent a proposal," she said coolly, tapping through her pages. "Excuse me?" Damon asked, completely thrown off. Sienna looked up at him, steady, calm, and completely unimpressed. "I know about the bet." Silence. Damon's smirk faltered for the first time that day. "What bet?" "Oh please," she said, folding her tablet and setting it down. "The private club, the friend with a grudge, the she's not your type dare. It's practically a soap opera script. I've worked in media long enough to know how guys like you play your games." Damon shifted in his seat. "So why agree to meet me?" Sienna leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Because I'm curious. Curious how far someone like you is willing to go to win." "You don't seem upset," he said, watching her closely. "I'm not," she replied simply. "Because here's the deal, Mr. Ellis. If you're going to play this little marriage game, I'm laying down the terms." Damon blinked again. "Wait, you're saying you'll actually go through with this?" "For 6 months, she nodded. "But this isn't your fantasy romance. No strings, no expectations. I don't want your money, your mansion, or your media attention. We marry, live under one roof, and pretend for the world. But I keep my independence, my job, my space, and my name." "And if I try to charm you?" he asked, that cocky grin returning. "You'll fail," she said flatly, "and it'll be hilarious." Their wedding took place 3 weeks later. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't extravagant. It was clinical, like a business deal being signed off. Sienna wore a sleek, modest white dress that didn't hug her curves for approval. It declared her presence. Damon stood beside her, smug and unreadable. No family attended, just a few fake smiles for the press. As they walked out of City Hall, Sienna paused on the steps, took a breath, and said, "Let's make one thing clear. You might be used to control, but I'm not someone you can manipulate." Damon chuckled. "You keep saying that, because you keep needing to hear it." That night, they moved into Damon's penthouse apartment, a cold, high-rise glass box with a breathtaking view and no soul. Sienna chose the guest room, decorated it with books and soft lights, and began treating the place like a temporary Airbnb. Damon, used to having women orbit his world, didn't know what to do with someone who created her own. He tried undermining her, small things, like scheduling meetings when she had plans, making backhanded comments about her appearance at charity events, even cutting funding to her publishing network. But Sienna never reacted with outrage. She responded with grace, defiance, and a smile that said, "Try harder." And for some reason, Damon kept trying, because the more she resisted him, the more intrigued he became. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Damon and Sienna simmered beneath every shared space. Every breakfast that ended in silence. Every evening event where they posed as the perfect couple. But beneath the surface, their dynamic was more like a chess match, two stubborn minds constantly testing each other's limits. It didn't take long for Damon to realize this wasn't going to be the smooth, scripted victory he envisioned. He couldn't buy Sienna's affection. He couldn't shame her into submission. She didn't care about the lifestyle he flaunted, the power he wielded, or the menacing presence he used to bend others to his will. In fact, she seemed almost amused by it. One morning, as they sat across from each other at the long dining table, Damon finally broke the silence. "You really don't want anything from me, do you?" he asked, watching her spread jam on her toast. Sienna didn't even look up. "Not a thing. No bags, no cards, no access to my staff or driver. Most women would kill for half of it. I'm not most women." "Damon." "Yeah," he muttered. "I'm starting to get that." She finally looked up, her eyes calm but firm. "Let's get one thing clear. I agreed to this arrangement because it suits me. Not because I need saving. Not because I'm flattered. And definitely not because I want to change you. I just want 6 months of peace. You can run your empire. And I'll live my life. No interference. No manipulation. Just space. And what happens after 6 months? I walk away," she said without flinching, "and you go collect your bet." Damon leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "You really think you can live with me for that long and not fall for me?" Sienna raised an eyebrow. "You really think this is about falling for anyone?" That was the beginning of their Cold War. A marriage not built on love or partnership, but boundaries. Damon, used to getting everything on his terms, found himself locked in a quiet struggle against someone who refused to be affected by him. He began testing the boundaries, subtle at first. He'd invite her to black tie events without asking, expecting her to play trophy wife. She'd show up wearing simple, elegant dresses that made a statement without trying. She never tried to compete with the high society crowd. She stood apart, proudly. Then came the sabotage, when Sienna's publishing house pitched a new children's literacy program to the city council. Damon used one of his shell companies to bid against them, just to throw her off. But instead of reacting in anger, Sienna held a press conference, calling out the anonymous bidder with poise and clarity, advocating for transparency and the public good. Her speech trended on social media for days. Damon watched from his office, jaw clenched. "How is she doing this?" he muttered to himself. Because no matter what he did, she refused to play his game. And that, more than anything, fascinated him. It was during one of their routine social obligations, a charity gala full of business elites and media buzz, that the shift began. Damon, dressed in his finest tux, had just finished giving a short speech when he returned to their table and found Sienna mid-conversation with a group of powerful women, holding court with grace and intelligence. She wasn't just surviving in his world, she was thriving in it. Later that evening, as they returned home, Damon finally said what had been gnawing at him. "You were impressive tonight." Sienna looked at him, mildly surprised. "Thank you. I mean it," he added. "You didn't just blend in, you owned the room." Sienna shrugged out of her coat and set it on the rack. "I didn't need to own anything. I was just being me. That's kind of the point, isn't it?" Damon murmured. She turned to face him. "You trying to compliment me or figure me out?" "Maybe both." She gave a small, tired smile. Don't waste your energy. I'm not some mystery to be solved. I'm just a woman who values her dignity." Damon stared at her, something unfamiliar flickering in his chest. Was it admiration? Respect? Maybe even envy? Whatever it was, it unsettled him. Because Sienna wasn't bending, and the more she stood her ground, the more Damon found himself questioning not just her, but himself. The turning point came one night when Damon found her on the penthouse balcony, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea as the city lights twinkled below. He approached quietly, expecting her to retreat or throw up a verbal wall. Instead, she spoke first. "Tell me something, Damon. What do you actually want from all this?" He hesitated, then sat beside her. "At first, to win. And now? I don't know," he admitted. "I thought this would be easy. I thought you'd fall in line or run the moment things got tough. But you didn't." Sienna nodded slowly. "You're not used to resistance." "I'm used to being in control," he said softly. "Well," she replied, gazing out at the skyline, "maybe it's time you learn to live without it." Those words, simple, soft, and devoid of any bitterness, hit Damon like a punch to the chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defiance. It was truth. And for the first time in his life, he listened. From that night on, Damon found himself changing in ways he couldn't quite explain. He stopped trying to win. He stopped trying to impress or dominate. He started observing, listening, even appreciating the moments of silence they shared. He noticed the way Sienna lit up when she read a great manuscript. How she smiled when kids sent letters to her company thanking them for their books. How she curled up with her cat, Nori, in the guest room and read poetry aloud with no one listening but herself. He noticed her, and it scared him, because the man who started this as a game, who thought he could manipulate love, was now the one being undone by it. Damon Ellis, once the master of calculated power plays, was coming undone, and he knew it. He couldn't pinpoint when it began. Maybe it was the night on the balcony, or the day she defended her publishing house in front of the press. Or maybe it was just the slow, relentless way Sienna kept showing him who she really was, without ever trying to win his approval. There was no moment of epiphany, no dramatic scene, just the unsettling realization that he was waking up every day and wondering what she was doing, how her day went, or if she'd stopped by the kitchen in her oversized sweater with tea in hand and that absent-minded look she wore when reading something deep. He had always loved the thrill of the chase. But this wasn't a chase. It was a surrender, and that terrified him. At a dinner party hosted by one of Damon's investment partners, the pressure to perform as the ideal couple returned in full force. Paparazzi flashed cameras outside, and the hall buzzed with familiar voices and backroom deals. Sienna, dressed in a soft emerald gown that hugged her curves unapologetically, was radiant, but it wasn't her beauty that turned heads, it was her presence. She didn't try to fit in. She owned her space. One of the guests, an executive Damon had once dated briefly, leaned in toward him and said with a grin, "She's different from your usual type. What's the story there?" Damon opened his mouth to offer some slick response, but he found himself hesitating. For once, he didn't want to explain her as a move in a game. "She challenges me," he said finally, "in all the best ways." Later that evening, on their way home, Sienna turned to him in the car and said, "That woman asked me how I landed someone like you." Damon winced. "What did you say?" "I told her I wasn't trying to land anyone," Sienna replied, her voice even. "That I'm just passing through." Damon looked out the window. "Do you always speak in riddles?" "No," she said, her voice soft, "only when the truth might hurt." The days grew cooler. Autumn swept into the city, bringing with it golden leaves and quiet changes. Sienna spent her time pouring into her literacy campaign, hosting reading events for underprivileged kids, and advocating for small publishers. Damon found himself secretly attending those events, watching from the sidelines, anonymous. For once, he began doing something he hadn't done in years. He listened. To her, to the world beyond his empire, to the people he'd once dismissed as background noise. He made subtle changes in his business, ended deals that exploited small creators, started a philanthropic branch under a new name, giving grants to educational nonprofits, without ever mentioning it to Sienna. Because for the first time, his actions weren't about recognition. They were about redemption. Then came the moment that changed everything. They were having dinner at home. A quiet night, pasta and red wine. Sienna was unusually quiet, stirring her fork around her plate. "What's on your mind?" Damon asked. She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I think it's time you knew the truth." Damon's pulse quickened. "My father's name was Charles Rhodes," she began. "He owned a small tech firm that focused on developing educational software for public schools. It wasn't flashy, but it mattered." Damon nodded slowly, the name striking a distant chord. "Your company, Ellis Global, acquired his software patents 5 years ago. You promised him a merger. But instead, you bled the company dry, sold off the assets, filed a claim for breach of contract. My dad lost everything." Silence filled the room like a bomb about to go off. "He took his life 3 months later," Sienna said, her voice trembling for the first time. "He left a note saying he failed us, that he trusted the wrong people." Damon's world blurred. He set down his wine glass, his throat dry. "I had no idea," he whispered. "I know," Sienna said quietly. "You didn't even know who he was. Just another small business swallowed up by the machine." He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, Damon Ellis felt something worse than shame. He felt powerless. Sienna rose from her seat. Slowly. "I didn't agree to this marriage because of the bet. I agreed because I wanted to see the man behind the headlines. I wanted to look into the eyes of the person who destroyed my father, and ask myself if he was capable of change." "And?" Damon rasped. "I haven't decided yet," she said, "but I needed you to know that I didn't walk into this blindly. I walked in with purpose." She turned and walked away, leaving Damon sitting there, shattered. That night, Damon sat alone in the dark, the city glittering beyond the windows like 1,000 unspoken regrets. He remembered every smug decision, every business maneuver where he put profits before people. He thought of Charles Rhodes, a name buried in quarterly reports, now forever burned into his memory. He understood now. This wasn't just a bet. Not to her. To Sienna. This marriage was justice. Not for revenge, but for closure. And he was the one on trial. The next morning, Sienna was gone. She left a note on the counter. "I need space. I won't be back for a while. Don't try to find me. Sienna." Damon stared at the words, his chest aching with something deeper than he'd ever allowed himself to feel. She didn't ask for anything. She just left. No drama, no confrontation. Because Sienna didn't need to scream. She had already made her point. And Damon Ellis was finally listening. The penthouse was quiet now. Too quiet. Damon Ellis had always thrived in noise, in the ringing of phones, the echo of closing deals, the background hum of luxury. But now, all that was gone. The silence stretched out like a punishment. And for once, he didn't try to fill it. Sienna's departure left more than an empty space in his home. It left a void inside him that his wealth couldn't touch. He tried working, couldn't focus. He tried going out, calling old friends, charming new women, but none of it landed. Because every time he looked into a stranger's eyes, he saw the one pair that mattered, the ones that had seen right through him and still chosen to stay until she couldn't anymore. Damon knew she was right to leave. And yet, it felt unbearable. He spent days reading through old files, contracts, memos, names of companies he'd acquired or crushed. One by one, he revisited every business deal that bore his signature, searching, for the first time, not for profit margins, but for damage. And what he found horrified him. Charles Rhodes wasn't the only one. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, of small family-run companies that had trusted his empire, only to be gutted for gain. He'd never known their stories, never cared to ask. But now, their names haunted him. He thought about Sienna's father, the man who had likely sat across from one of Damon's associates. Hopeful, grateful, believing he'd secured a future for his family, only to have it ripped away, piece by piece. And Damon had never lost a minute of sleep over it. Until now, 2 weeks after Sienna left, Damon showed up at the community center where she used to host reading circles for local kids. He didn't speak, just watched from the back as volunteers read stories out loud, laughter echoing through the room. He walked up to the director afterward, handed her a check, and told her there would be more. Enough to fund their programs for the next 5 years. No press. No name in the newsletter. Just, help. He visited the local library next. Donated a wing in honor of Charles Rhodes. Then, one by one, he began reaching out to the companies he had once destroyed, not as Damon Ellis the tycoon, but as a man trying to right the wrongs. Some hung up on him. Others cursed him, but a few listened. And with each apology, each repair, a small piece of his pride gave way to humility. Sienna had been staying with an old college friend outside the city. The air was fresher there, the noise softer. She spent her days hiking, reading, clearing her head, but her nights, those were harder. She kept wondering if she'd made a mistake, not by leaving, but by letting herself care. Because somewhere in the middle of her plan, something unexpected had happened. She'd begun to see the cracks in Damon's armor. The moments of silence, the hesitation, the way he looked at her, not like someone trying to win a bet, but like someone trying to understand her. And that scared her, because justice had been the goal. But forgiveness? That was never part of the plan. One chilly Saturday morning, there was a knock at the front porch of the cabin. Sienna opened the door and froze. Damon stood there, hair unkempt, coat wrinkled, a bouquet of yellow wildflowers in his hand. Not roses, not designer, just simple, imperfect wildflowers. "Before you close the door," he said quietly, "just let me say one thing." She didn't speak, but she didn't close the door either. Damon took that as permission. "I didn't come here to win you back," he said. "I came because I couldn't carry what I've done alone anymore. You were right, about everything, about your father, about who I used to be." Sienna crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I've spent the last few weeks undoing what I can," he continued. "It'll never be enough. I know that, but I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. I just wanted to thank you for forcing me to look at myself." He held out the flowers. "These aren't bribes, just something I picked up on the way. I know you like yellow." Still, she didn't speak. "I'll leave you alone now," he said finally, setting the flowers on the step. "Just, thank you." He turned to leave. Then, softly, Sienna called out, "Wait." He froze. She stepped outside, arms still folded, her voice quiet but steady. "You look different," she said, tired, softer. "I feel different," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment. "I didn't think you'd actually show up here," she said. "I wasn't sure I had the right," Damon admitted. Sienna looked away. "So, what happens now?" "That's up to you," he said. "I'm not here to rewrite the past. But if there's any version of the future where we can talk again, even just as strangers, I'll take it." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in. It's cold." Inside, they didn't talk about the past. Not yet. They just made tea and sat across from each other like two people trying to understand who they were. And who they might still become. For the first time, Damon didn't try to impress her. He didn't dominate the room, or wear the confident mask he used to. And Sienna didn't hold onto her defenses as tightly. They spoke, slowly, honestly, about nothing and everything. About her father, about his regrets, about what it meant to truly change, not just to say it, but to prove it, every day. When he left that afternoon, there was no kiss, no promise, just a shared understanding. The door was no longer closed. Over the next few weeks, Damon didn't push. He sent her books he thought she'd love. He showed up to her public readings, sitting quietly in the back. Sometimes, they'd get coffee afterward, sometimes not. But gradually, the space between them shrank, and the silence that once separated them began to feel like something new. Peace. Winter crept into the city slowly, frosting windows and painting streetlights in quiet gold. And with it came a stillness that mirrored something stirring inside Sienna Rhodes. The world hadn't stopped spinning since Damon Ellis walked out of her life and then gently, unexpectedly, returned. But her world, once fueled by anger and unspoken pain, had shifted in subtle, disorienting ways. She no longer saw Damon as the symbol of everything her father lost. Now, he was something else. Someone else. Still flawed, still uncertain, but not the man who had once crushed her father's dreams without blinking. He was changing, and that terrified her even more than the past ever did. She saw it in the little things. He had stopped trying to win her, and that made her listen. When they met up at the bookstore one chilly Thursday afternoon, he didn't bring flowers, didn't comment on how she looked. He brought a book of poetry by her favorite author, one she'd mentioned months ago in passing, and left it on the table with a sticky note that read, "For the days when words are easier than feelings." They read together for a while. Didn't say much, but the silence between them was no longer cold. It was warm, gentle, alive with unspoken forgiveness that hadn't yet found the right words. That weekend, Damon invited her to his office, not for business, but for something far more personal. When Sienna stepped into the high-rise, she expected suits and assistants, but instead, she found only Damon, standing beside a wall covered with handwritten notes and charts. A map of redemption. He turned as she entered. "These are the businesses we harmed. The ones my acquisitions either collapsed or sidelined. I've spent the last 2 months reaching out, helping them get back on their feet, or funding their next chance." Sienna scanned the wall. Dozens of names. Red string connecting events, decisions, mistakes. "You did all this?" she asked quietly. "I did the damage," he said. "Least I can do is try to undo it." Her fingers hovered over one note. "Trinity Tech. They were in our neighborhood. My dad mentored the founder." "I know." Damon nodded. "They've been rehired to build educational systems for the literacy project you started. I didn't put my name on it. It's your work. I just helped." Sienna's throat tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because I don't want you to forgive me just for who I am now. I want you to know who I was. What I've done. All of it." He looked at her then, eyes raw. "No mask. And I'll keep doing this. Sienna, whether you stay in my life or not." It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a declaration of love. But it was the first time anyone had ever looked at Sienna and said, "I take responsibility." Not in words, in action. And that meant something. The next day, she walked past the old building that once housed her father's company. It had been repurposed into a youth tech lab, a space for students to explore programming, engineering, and creative software development. She had read about it in a press release a week ago but hadn't connected the dots. Now she knew. There was a plaque on the wall, in memory of Charles Rhodes, whose dreams still inspire futures. No company name, no logo, just that. She stood there for a long time. And something inside her, grief, maybe, or resentment, began to loosen. That night, she called him. Damon picked up after one ring. "I saw the building," she said. He didn't speak. "I don't know what to do with this," she whispered. "I've spent so long trying to hold onto the anger. It gave me purpose, but now it just hurts." "I know," he said gently. "You don't owe me anything, Sienna. Not forgiveness, not even time. But you have changed," she said. "You're not the man who made that bet anymore." "I didn't even know who I was then," he admitted. "You helped me figure it out." There was a long pause. "I miss you," she said finally. He closed his eyes. "I miss you too." They met again in the city garden where her father used to take her when she was little. A quiet place in the chaos. She wore a simple brown coat. And Damon brought 2 cups of coffee. No fancy latte orders this time. Just plain black and light cream. They sat on the same bench where she'd once watched pigeons with her dad. The winter air sharp but not unpleasant. "I still don't know where this goes," she said. "Me either," Damon replied. "But I'm not angry anymore." He turned to look at her. "That means more than you know." She exhaled. "I'm not ready to forget. But I might be ready to move forward." Damon smiled. Not with triumph, but quiet gratitude. "That's all I hoped for." In the days that followed, they began spending time together, not as husband and wife, not as business opponents, but as 2 people exploring what healing looked like. She invited him to a poetry reading. He brought her to a youth entrepreneurship workshop he funded. They didn't talk about the past every day, but it was always there. Only now, it wasn't a weight, it was a lesson. Then, one evening, they stood in the kitchen of her modest apartment, sharing takeout and laughter. Damon reached for her hand, not with the arrogance of a man who believed he deserved her, but with the vulnerability of someone who hoped he might. Sienna didn't pull away. "I'm not sure I'm ready for everything," she whispered. "Then we'll start with something," he said. "One honest moment at a time." 6 months. That was the length of the original agreement, the cruel, Arrogant bet Damon Ellis made with his friend to prove he could marry a woman completely unlike his usual type. 6 months of pretending, of manipulation, of seeing a marriage as a game. But those 6 months? They changed everything. The day they were supposed to separate came with little fanfare. No ceremony, no crowd, just 2 people sitting across from each other at a small cafe in the city, sipping coffee while time quietly acknowledged what was supposed to be the end. "So," Sienna said, setting her cup down gently. "This is it?" Damon gave a small nod. "The contract ends today." She looked out the window, watching people pass, strangers with no idea how much weight those words carried. Then she turned back to him. "Do you still care about the bet?" He smiled, soft, sad. "I forgot about the bet the moment you walked away from me." Sienna didn't answer right away. She just watched him, really watched him. The man sitting before her wasn't the one who had mocked her behind closed doors or tried to control the narrative. He was quiet, grounded, real, and it wasn't just the apology tour or the money he gave away. It was the way he listened now. The way he no longer tried to fill every silence with charm. The way he looked at her not with ownership, but with respect. "I was never supposed to fall for you," she whispered. "I was never supposed to deserve you," he said. A beat of silence. And then, she reached across the table and took his hand. "Maybe we start over," she said. "No contracts, no conditions, just us." His fingers curled around hers. "I'd like that." They didn't jump back into a whirlwind romance. No extravagant gestures or flashy headlines. Just small, intentional steps. Late-night walks through quiet neighborhoods. Movie nights with burnt popcorn and sarcastic commentary. Shared volunteering shifts at the children's reading program. Long talks about books, memories, and how love, when real, doesn't demand fireworks. It simply asks for truth. Trust took time, and both were willing to give it. 3 months later, in a sun-drenched doctor's office filled with pastel posters and a faint scent of antiseptic, Sienna sat on the edge of the exam table, nervously wringing her hands. Damon sat beside her, holding her coat. The nurse returned with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Ms. Rhodes. You're about 9 weeks along." Sienna blinked. "I'm pregnant?" "Yes." The nurse chuckled. "Very." Sienna turned to Damon, her expression a mix of shock and wonder. He didn't say a word, just stepped forward and gently pressed his forehead to hers, letting out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for years. When they walked out of the office, his arm was wrapped protectively around her. For once, there were no paparazzi, no reporters, just 2 people with an unexpected future growing quietly between them. That night, they lay on the couch wrapped in a thick blanket, neither one saying much at first. "You scared?" she finally asked. "Terrified," Damon admitted, "but not of being a dad, of messing it up, of not being the man our child deserves." "You're not the man you used to be," she whispered. He looked at her. "Because of you." Sienna shook her head. "No, because of you. You made the choice to change. I just gave you the mirror." Damon pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "We're not perfect," he said. "We've got scars. But maybe that's how real love begins. Not in fairy tales," she agreed, "but in broken promises that get rebuilt." A quiet wedding took place the following spring. Nothing grand, nothing showy, just a garden full of yellow flowers, close friends, and an officiant who kept it short and sweet. There were no bets, no smug friends watching from the sidelines. Just vows, real ones. "I don't promise to be perfect," Damon said, his voice steady, "but I promise to grow, to try, to never stop listening." Sienna smiled through tears. "I promise to speak truth, even when it hurts, to forgive, to stand beside you, and to love you, not for what you were, but for who you're becoming." They kissed to the sound of wind through trees and the quiet sniffles of happy witnesses. And for once, Damon Ellis didn't feel like a man who had won something. He felt like a man who had earned it. Blank. Months later, as they sat together in their child's nursery, soft lullabies playing in the background, yellow light dancing on the walls, Damon watched Sienna rock their newborn daughter in her arms. "She's so small," he whispered. "She's perfect," Sienna murmured. He knelt beside them, gently stroking the baby's fingers. I want her to grow up knowing she can be strong. That she doesn't have to be anyone's prize. That she can write her own story. She already is, Sienna said with a smile. Because she comes from redemption. Epilogue. The tabloids never got the story. They never found out that the marriage built on a bet ended in love, not because of drama or headlines, but because two people dared to face the worst parts of themselves. And chose to change. The world saw Damon Ellis's comeback as a miracle of PR. But the truth? His greatest comeback wasn't in business. It was in becoming a man worthy of forgiveness. And a father capable of love. And it all started with one woman who refused to be bought.